cover the text of Job. We're going to be rolling into chapter 31, chapter 32, and beyond today. So before we get any further, though, let's go ahead and take a moment and bow together in prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the time we shared together in study this morning. We hope as disciples, as listeners, as participants in the kingdom of God, that we pay attention to this section of Old Testament text. Help us to be aware of your intentions for including it in our Bibles. Help us to be moldable and changeable, to be reformed into the image of Christ, and forgive us of our sins. And we offer this prayer in your Son's name. Amen. So we've got a bit of a two-part thing today to accomplish. Number one is to kind of look back far enough to see where we've gone in the first 31 chapters, so that when we go to chapter 32, 37, which is another human speech, we've got a good footing to think about that combined speech there. And then when we talk about God later in the closing parts of our class together, we're going to have the frame of mind that we need. And the reason we're going to do that today is I was sitting thinking about the different concepts we've explored just in this class, and how easy it is to forget some of them when you're working on the new thing. I think all of us at times, we kind of take our blinders and we focus in on the task at hand. And we I'm doing this thing. This is the thing that I'm doing right now, and I've got to have no other stuff going on. That's useful a lot of times. There's good value to being hyper-focused. But in a subject like Job is trying to get us to think about, and the different voices that participate, it's really easy to get them kind of muddled, and get our own thoughts muddled in it. And so I think it's important for us to pause and return to being careful readers for just a little bit, to review a couple of things, to get a sense of all of this. Some of it is summarized well by just kind of paying attention to what happens in the most recent chapters, 29, 30, and 31, and paying attention to how that then pushes Job's final oath. Remember how he seals it at the end with, I'm going to write my name on this. I'm going to be willing to sign my name to this. We're going to have a counter speech in a second that comes up. So before we get any further, if you were going to describe the first, let's just say 30 chapters of Job, what are some of the sentences, as short as you can make them, that you would use to describe Job chapter 1 to Job chapter 30? It's a big swing, right? What things happen? What happens in the first two chapters of Job? Who are our main characters in that part of the text?
Job, God, and Satan.
Job, God, and Satan. Who are our supporting cast? His family. And then his friends come in later, right? For our reading purposes, we need to think about everybody here in two ways. Way number one is the easy way. Human beings who are experiencing this. That's actually the easy way to think about each of the parts of this story. The second way is harder. To realize that every single human participant serves a purpose in telling the story. And God is telling us this story intentionally. He's preserved it in the Bible. It's preserved for us. It is referred to by other authors inside the biblical witness. And the parallel to that is how we think about, really quickly, the book of Acts. What does the book of Acts record roughly? Like if you're going to say this is what Acts chapter 1 through this close tells us, what is it?
The giving of the Holy Spirit.
Holy Spirit.
And the starting of the church.
And the starting or the inhabitation of the church. It starts at the cross with its death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. It's opened up, and then everyone inhabits it. So that's kind of the story. But if you remember, the mechanics of the story are something happens, Luke introduces a new person to us, and that new person we meet tells the next part of the story. Whether it's Stephen, whether it's Saul, who then we learn in Greek is referred to as Paul, etc. We meet this, and sometimes their stories are like half a page, and it's really painful. Like we don't get this full, Disneyland ending, and everything's wonderful, and it was great. No, he had suffering and sorrow, or some of them were rebellious. They fought against what God was saying. So they're doing two things there. They're real people who experienced a thing, but they also help tell us the story. The parts of their lives that are recorded tell us this. So Job's family, Job's friends, we can think of them as people serving the purpose of giving wisdom to us. So they are, in effect, a literary representation of ideas. When Job's wife speaks, is she ever pleasant in that record? There's not really, she's not like, yes, this is going to be great, it's going to be wonderful. Do we think that that's how she was throughout her whole life? Does that make sense for a human being to be that way? No, she had joy, she had children, she had great love, and she was heartbroken, and she was wrecked. But from a wisdom standpoint, her role is to tell us a human corner of how people react to awfulness like this. Job's friends, we see them maybe in parts of their worst theologically, and they're serving another part of wisdom. They're telling us information that's designed to help us understand life better. And God is carefully recording those things for us through inspiration and through the scribes. So again, now we have the first part of the story, our participants, real human beings who really experience this, but they're serving the purpose of telling us wisdom. And then we have these circling speeches, where a lot of folks write them as first cycle, second cycle, etc. That's the fancy terms. I have a little subnote that I have scribbled in my notes. First fight / argument, second fight / argument, because the fancy term means the same thing as the second term, kind of. There's a little bit of difference, but they're fighting, they're arguing, they're bickering, and you can tell that because are some of the things they say, let's say a little out of pocket or crude or harsh? A different standard would be if you had said that to your mother as a child, would you have had no consequences or consequences? And I use that loosely. How many of you would have seen a shoe flying like a boomerang to your side of your head if you had said some of the things that Job says to his friends? I think I probably would have had shoes from both sides. Like, I don't know, like my mom would have picked a second shoe off the floor and bounced it off of the side of the wall, and it was kind of like, probably a reasonable outcome. So argument has a level of truth to it. But keep in mind, Job will later say about his general conscience that he had done nothing wrong. You might say he's not including his argument with his friends, and that's probably a fair thing to think about, but it helps us understand his motivation. He feels that he has done no wrong in this sense, and he has the position to present himself this way. And so his closing monologue, if you will, kind of starts 29, 30, closes out in 31, and it's this whole of a review of then. Then everything was splendid for him. On a literary wisdom level, it makes us think about the statement that the deceiver, the accuser, the liar of liars, the father of lies, the prince of this world, who is also referred to as Satan in a lot of our translations, or the devil in other parts. What does he say about Job's life?
That he has everything,
Yeah, a phrase we use relative to it is you built a hedgerow, or like a protective circumstance. By the way, that's probably the origin story for I'm going to pray for what around someone? A hedge of protection. Now, when you think about that, and maybe you're using your prayers, you go, maybe I don't want to use the same language that the devil uses in my prayers, even if my intent is better than his. Because generally our intent, I would imagine, is better than his. But it makes us think about that, right? You have protected him with all of these blessings. You've blessed him with family. You've blessed him with wealth. You've blessed him with food, with health. What happens when I take all of that away? Surely we're going to find out that he's really like everybody else. And it's just a transactional relationship with God. And so when Job is reflecting on then, one of the things that we should be thinking about is, what then is the devil trying to convince his audience of? Because who's he arguing with? Who's the devil arguing with? God. And particularly if we remember, we're looking at this in two ways. These are real beings, really in the dialogue. And it's not just some, I sat down and wrote a thing that sounds really cool, but it doesn't involve real people. It's not just Dante's Inferno, which is a different kind of literature, which is a wisdom literature of a kind, but not biblical wisdom literature. So he's trying to convince somebody. We want to say it's God, but there could be other components to the story we don't know. There's a lot more information that could be out there, but most certainly that's the primary purpose. And what happens if he convinces God of this lie? This is part of the thinking through part where your brain asks, like, what if God agreed with him? Now, we know the answer. We're playing a positive thing, but remember, the devil doesn't know everything. We think he does sometimes. He knows the way people move, and he works with them. He's not an idiot, though. He's not just some caricature, because clearly he is conniving and sneaky. That's the thing you can think about. I don't necessarily think that there is a good single answer to that question, but it is part of the implicit question that Job is trying to get us to think about. Is the devil right? Because he'll answer that question for us. Because Job's going to tell us no. And the wisdom of the text is going to tell us no. But Job is outside the conversation of the devil and God. And we are outside all of their conversations, paying attention to it and trying to arrive at the same conclusion. So his now had gone from pleasantness, goodness, blessing, to pain, awfulness, anguish, sorrow. Scraping himself by the fire with the pieces of a pot. Just this is the only way I can get relief. Raise your hand if you have immunity to chicken pox the old school way. I got old school chicken pox immunity. I was forcibly infected, which is the way you did it, right? Do you have memories of that experience, those of us who have the old school protection? How much scratching did you do? Not how much you were told to do, but how much did you actually accomplish? Every possible second that someone wasn't looking at me, right? That's a way to think about the context of Job, where this is how he's feeling, but amplified. He doesn't just have chickenpox. It's a much worse circumstance that he's in. All of the emotional weight, all the physical weight that's on him now. He says early on in our then and now, "Oh, that I were as in the months of old, as in the days when God watched over me, when his lamp shone upon my head, and by his light I walked through darkness. Job's speech there would make us think that the statements of the devil have some substance to them. Oh, would it be that God was blessing me like he used to? Which is interesting because he doesn't abandon God. It's also interesting that we learn in the fuller scope of the Bible that these are not one-to-one ratios, that God's blessings that he gives to all humankind have nothing to do with your individual faithfulness. The rain falls where? The prophets will tell us. Yeah, the good, the bad, the just and the unjust. God's blessing of rain is for all. So some of the things that he had been blessed with had 100% nothing to do with his faithfulness to God, though some of his blessings were directly correlated to God in unique ways. Job 30 is the statement, I cry to you for help, and you do not answer me. I stand, and you only look at me. To think about that from Job's perspective when he's going through all of this. Where is God? This is a parallel question that I think it got most notable around the 60s or 70s when a book that included part of this title was published. And now that phrase is used often. Where is God when I hurt? Is that a good question to ask in life? It's a strong one. It's actually one of the life questions that we should wrestle with. It's not the one that we want to work with, right? We want to know how can God fix it? How can God make it better? And we're happy to think about God is here when life is good. Oh, that's great. But where is God when I hurt? Not even just where is God when they hurt, but when I hurt. Cecilia?
I've always thought we always have a tendency to turn to God when there is something wrong. But when things are going great, do we remember him or do we take credit?
Yeah. And that's a struggle for all of us. We especially so in Western culture, that's everything Europe to us, that has become highly individualized. Everybody is bootstrapped. I picked myself up. I made this of myself. That can be a very true part of our lives, but almost always there's somebody else helping us somehow, teaching us something, giving us opportunities, recognizing our hard work and our effort and saying, hey, come over here. There's a stairway right here, and if you start stepping on the stairway, eventually you'll be where you want to go. Or we see someone else making the same journey and go, I could climb those stairs. They look hard, I can climb those. So there's always more to that story, but we have the culture that says, I'm doing it on my own. It doesn't really work that way in the context of the Bible, by the way. The context of the Bible is 100% that faith is shared. There's never an instance in the scriptures where you see someone being faithful and living their entire existence in isolation of others. It just doesn't function that way. Your faith is yours, but it is developed in community. Les?
What we have to keep in mind for ourselves through all of this is God is in the same place in our good times and our bad times.
Yeah.
He's doing things in his way and not in our way, in his time and not in our time. And that's where faith comes in, and it makes our faith stronger if we trust God. We're told that his thoughts and his ways are so far above ours, we can't understand it all. And sometimes I think we hurt ourselves by trying to understand more than we're capable of. But we have to lean on our faith.
Yeah, our faith has to be centered in the wheel of our experiences. It's, like I said earlier when we're coming in, it's difficult to hold a bunch of stuff in our hands at once, and so we tend to retreat to focus on this one thing. When we do that, though, we might then effectively ignore the fact that our faith is the substance holding all of this stuff together. And there's some great balance in all of that. Again, this is from last week a little bit, represented again here, taking you through Job 31. As I mentioned before, and actually back in, I think, 24, I preached on this particular text as the parallel to Proverbs 31, because it really has some great interconnection there. So something to think about. Every time you think about Proverbs 31, now you can just think about Job 31 and realize that that's a great text for aspiration as a man. It's biblical manhood in many ways. And it has that same tone and sense that Proverbs 31 has in regards to its general theme and content. And you'll note in both texts, they are presented positively. It's not like beat yourselves into submission because of your failure. Both of them are aspire to goodness and greatness in the way that they're written. But he again closed that text out, if you remember, with, here is my signature. Let the Almighty answer me. This is, I think, one of the most problematic statements of Job. From a theological, like what God is, God knows standpoint. Because are you really going to call God to answer you? Because he's like, I want him to come and where is he? He's looking at me. Why isn't he talking to me? Why isn't he telling me? I think if there's a problem with Job's situation, that he's stepping beyond himself, it's in that tone right there. But when you survey with his statements in his life and God's response, Job's assertions aren't the problem. His statements about himself aren't the problem. His single challenge is not realizing what Les pointed out a second ago. That God was there. He was impatient. Job was. We want our answer right now. Got to have this one. Got to know right now. That's a permanent human challenge. Because does Job fear God for nothing? Job 31 he's got this full thing. And then we have another of his friends come in who's a little different than the message of the earlier dialogues. We've met him before. We kind of know a little about him. This is the youngest of the people. He is Elihu, son of Barachel, a Buzite of the family of Ram. He's young. He's been listening to all of this go on. He's been listening to Job. He's held his tongue. And he says, and this is the way that describes him, he's full of words. He's got a lot to say. You ever watch a conversation where you see somebody and you can see them kind of like just waiting? They got stuff to say. Now, I want you to imagine yourself about 10 years ago. How more likely was it when you were young to be the person who had something to say? I got something to say. If you were to have met Phil from like age 25 to 30, he was a problem. He had a whole lot to say and didn't know what to say, when to say it, or how to say it. So I can commiserate a lot with Elihu right here. That maybe he should wind it back a little bit and apply the filter and say, maybe all this doesn't need to be said. But for our benefit, Elihu is now being used for our encouragement, our wisdom here. The Bible describes him as taking new wine and putting it into an old wineskin. Is that a metaphor you guys are familiar with? What do you think is going to happen to that wineskin? Just poof. How many of you have put something in the microwave that should not have been in there? What's the outcome? Not good. They're like, What'd you put in the microwave? I'll tell you about it later. It was safely accomplished as part of a science experiment. That's what I call it when I was doing dumb stuff. But it was outside. Everywhere. He's just going to burst out. Everything's just going to explode. Because what he has to say, he's worked up. He's got to say it. He's got to declare it. It's got to get out there. Job 32, 2 through 3. His wrath was kindled against Job because he justified himself rather than God. Also against his 3 friends was his wrath kindled because they had found no answer and yet had condemned Job. Now notice he's got 2 targets. He's angry at Job for justifying himself against God. He's also angry at his 3 friends for condemning Job without actually answering him. And this is where the 25-year-old, 30-year-old Phil comes into the equation. He thinks he can do what they could not. And if you want to think about how you're developing your faith and learning to trust God more and not to rush to solve things and overthink stuff, like partially what Les also said a moment ago, it's right there. Thinking that you're the only one who can solve the problems. Look, that's just not how it works. How many mechanics, Adam, how many mechanics work at Delta? 5,000. Are they all pretty much good mechanics?
Truthfully?
Careful answer. Careful answer. Not relative to your expertise.
80%.
80% of them are good mechanics. Guess what? I guarantee you 80 to 100% of those mechanics are better at it than I am. By a substantial margin. My best skill in this regard is I can read and follow directions. The problem I would have is I'm easily distracted. I would see all the shiny, cool machines in the shop and get nothing done whatsoever. And then I would question the work I have done and have to start over again. Like I'd be a problem. But all of them are probably better than I am at that task, right? And trust me, you do not want me fixing your plate. Is that we don't want that? Don't need that, right? Everyone can agree? Shaking us in full agreement. Independent of our expert analysis of the quality of the 20%, we know that I'm probably not even that good. So, Job's circumstance and his older friends, and even Job, in contrast to the wrath. Oh, but I've got an answer for you. And the challenge that is even deeper underneath that is that in some ways Elihu ain't wrong. He gets some of this right at first pass. But he and Job suffer from the same lack of perspective. And we'll see this when we look more into it next week too. Because neither of them are who? God. When God comes back from the whirlwind and says, "Where were you?" Remember, it's not just addressed to Job. Nor is it just addressed to his friends. It's also addressed to whom? Us. God speaks from the whirlwind through this story, through these people who are also wisdom providers to us. And there are some components of some situations that are undecipherable from the human perspective. Just simply, we do not possess the capacity to hold all these things in our mind at the same time and make the just and right decision. As much as we would love to be the one, I got to figure it out, I know what to do. You start thinking about all the different complications of your own life and ask yourself, do I know anyone I want to serve as the judge of my past? Could I express to them fully all my experiences and why I felt or said the things that I did? Will they understand it like I did? If we can kind of think about that, then it helps us understand why Elihu and Job's perspective about all humanity and even their own circumstances is limited, charitably speaking. As noted, he is defined in the text and otherwise young, important instrument of the story, angry, but adamantly sure of himself. And by the way, remember, again, real human beings, real storytelling, but his age is important to understanding the wisdom of everything. It would have been culturally normal for him to speak last anyway, due to his age. They would let everyone go first. This is all normal. You kind of see that also in other circumstances, that the least of the ages would speak the last in these things, because nobody's listening to that point anyway. There's kind of a way we think about it in some senses. But in relative terms of should he have any kind of real wisdom, not really. We're thinking about it as a literary tool. Because again, using Adam's workplace experience, let's say you hired our son James today to work at Adam. I work with Adam there at the Delta shop. Adam, do you want James doing anything important if he shows up day one? It's okay to say, no, you don't want him doing anything important.
Not until he's
Properly trained. You need some experience. How long does that take? What's the onboarding training for someone who, let's say they do have the 2-year program?
In my shop, 6 months to a year before you got a concept of what's
So
going on.
2 months to a year, so maybe even more, based on the individual, right? So you want to give them time to figure things out before the really important tasks, other than go find this part. That's important, but not vital task, right? So in this concept of wisdom, we don't expect the young to have a grasp of life. We just don't. Even if they've had a rough experience, because they didn't have enough perspective. And so again, his status here is designed to teach us something, not only about the circumstance, but about the fact that we too are young. And say, I don't feel young. I got you, Cecilia. I haven't ran off with your question, your comment. Do you feel young, relatively speaking?
No.
Les said, absolutely not. He's like, but wait a minute, Les is older than I am. He is. Doesn't feel young. Do I feel young? You know, but some of the folks in the class are in their 20s.
Depends on the day.
Depends on the day. Being in your 20s, stuff starts to slow down a little bit. Body doesn't work right. Guess what? Doesn't matter. That's not the component of wisdom we're thinking about with this. This sense of maturity is contrasted to the creator of all humankind, sustainer of all circumstances. And while physically, yes, he is young compared to the others, and certainly inexperienced, and certainly lacking wisdom, in contrast to what's going to happen, he is a bit of cosmic dust in the experience of all humankind. Cecilia?
I was just gonna say, his argument's pretty valid, though. You know, we have a tendency to, I think, runners on, think that because someone's older, that your perspective on things is not relative. But young people have something to add. They may not be as wise and may not have lived as long, but their perspective on things can help you see things in a different way.
Yeah. Here's what he brings to the table, and this is internally acknowledged. He's honest. He's sincere. Confidence isn't bad. It can be misplaced, and it's certainly exaggerated in his context. And his fear of God is genuine. Those are real positives, but that's not enough. Because sincerity alone doesn't make his full argument true. Passion never replaces the revelation of God's will. You can tremble at the thought of God and still be wrong about what God's doing. God's really scary, terrifying. Doesn't necessarily then move you to do the right thing. Especially with no input. Are snakes bad? Oh, we have some qualified answers. I guarantee you, though, there's a couple folks in the audience here who think all snakes are bad. And I can tell that by behavior. And on a behavioral level, if we put a snake in their same box that they're in, the box gets burnt down. Right? But intellectually, let me ask the second question. Are rats bad?
Not in their own place.
Now, if they're doing the rat stuff, but I don't know what that is all the time. But who keeps the rat population at bay?
Cats.
Snakes. Snakes eat more rats, certainly mice, than cats do. Cats just play with them and come back and get food from you because they're smart. They have humans trained. Humans are the subservient world to the ruling cat population, at least how it's presented. Sometimes you can be afraid of a thing but not really understand the thing. Well, rat snake's not a problem. Creepy. Totally get it. But problem? Not really. Especially if it's doing its job. If it's keeping the smaller critters that I really, really don't like at bay, that's a really good rat snake. Especially if it follows my general rule of life. People inside, animals outside. Like if it follows that rule, man, we got everything going along just fine. If they cross the borders, and we've had an incursion, and then we have a whole national crisis. When we're thinking about God and his might and his power, sometimes we think we're the hawk from the sky when we're actually the mouse who doesn't understand the purpose of the snake, the fox, or even the hawk that does live in the sky. And sometimes we're so far down the knowledge tree and the understanding tree, which is a separate little pathway, that we have a new problem. We neither understand nor know. And Elihu helps us get that because he serves, this is his wisdom role, as a mirror for what we're all tempted to do. The desire to have an answer for someone when they hurt. Where is God when they hurt? Well, let me just go tell you what's going on. And if I just tell you this, you're going to feel better. If I tell you that you have a bacterial infection, does the infection hurt less? Oh, but I can treat it now. Yeah, but I'm sure it's quite awful. If I tell you that we're going to have to amputate your toe because of a problem, does the amputation's consequences seem less to you? You're going to be unbalanced forever, and it's going to feel weird. Oh, but it's only happened because these are not one-to-one things. And that's when we're right about the mechanical issues. Now we're talking about spiritual issues that transcend the flesh, transcend human experience. Again, this is why I asked the question earlier. What did the devil think he was going to do with this plan? What was he trying to convince? Did he only want Job to suffer? I think maybe. There's a possibility. But I think he had more plans to it.
We wanted Job to go turn against God. That was the whole plan.
Yeah.
Told him he would do the thing that his wife suggested. He would curse you.
Yeah. And to convince God that Job is the tool that proves that the devil is right and God's wrong. And yet, could I have ever answered that for Job had I been sitting with him? No, I couldn't have. And even now that I have his whole story laid out to him and I read it to him, is that something that Job with the pot shirt is going to understand? Not at the level that I want him to. Even afterwards, might not understand it at the well that we're academically and through wisdom trying to get to.
This is a good example of how we see things more clearly after we've gone through it. When we're going through it, we don't necessarily see God in the situation, but after you've gone through it and you look back, you can say, oh, he was there the whole time.
Yeah. And this occurs to us a bit in chapter 36. 26, 26. Behold, God is great, and we know him not. There's also a bit of a Christological echo here, because there is a distance between humanity and God in a literary and in a way the religion is structured in the Old Testament. People can only get so close. Some of them get closer. Some of the prophets get closer. Some of the leaders get closer. But most of the masses of Israel are at bay due to their sin, due to the system. And then in Christ, the fullness of God is revealed. And we shift from we don't know him to not only did he create us, he knows us, and we have the potential to be fully known by him and to know him. And so there's a link in the story here that Christ connects two parts that were just not really in the option of, I want to pick option C in the multi-choice test. I want to know God at that level. We are privileged in that sense, and the New Testament tells us this. For those of us who are living at this time, have a mystery revealed that the prophets longed to know. That's some of that here. Les, did you have something?
I was just thinking, you're talking about the prophets, and it's sometimes hard for us to go through Old Testament stuff and try to apply it in our lives the way it will help us without confusing things. And I was reading Jeremiah this morning, and the beginning of it, and God tells how he chose Jeremiah to be a prophet.
Yeah.
The prophets were special to God. He chose them to get his word out. Sometimes most of the time, I think it's probably in warnings to the people to straighten their lives up. But it's a different situation with us, and we can't compare apples to apples. In trying to do the Old Testament, we have to understand the difference in the dividing line between what we're living under and what these people are living under.
There's a huge difference there, although on a like learning how God interacted with humanity, these are the same things. This leads us to my last little thing to think about. Tomorrow, next week, and next year in your life, you're going to sit with someone who, like Job, is going through a circumstance that they can't articulate or understand. And you're going to be tempted to give them advice, because we all are. And we're going to want to say things that tell them that it's going to be okay. Is that a fair possibility for the future for all of us? He's partly right, Elihu, partly right, partly wrong. What does that then direct us towards with regard to what we say to someone in those same situations? Maybe think before we open up. I know that's like a super powerful skill that we have. Do we use that superpower all the time, to think before we speak? No, we speak then think. And then try to undo what we just spoke. That's like our human behavior. It doesn't mean we don't talk. It doesn't mean that we don't interact. We can argue fair that the first thing you should do is just be present. You just go there. Talk about life. Talk about whatever they want to talk about. Listen. Listen without judgment. Let them tell. But we got to realize that there are a couple of things that are biblically true. Number one, we are not the judge. Even if we're just absolutely certain that their sin brought them to where they're at right now, what are the historical information that we should appeal to whether we were right or wrong? Do we have a chance of being wrong? And if you tell someone that their circumstances are due to their sin and you're wrong, how bad is that for you? And what if they believe you and spend the rest of their life trusting what you just said to them? You want some weight on your shoulders? That's how you put it up there yourself. Like, yeah, I want to carry this forever. So, think. Like, wait, think, and then realize that the message that God gives back to Job assures Job that God is there and assures them of a future. And maybe that's something that is part of the better answer. Hey, This is going to pass. I don't know how it's going to pass. I do know it is. And there's going to be a tomorrow of some kind. Let's think about that. Because it doesn't matter how they got to where they're at, really. What matters is where they're going to go, what they're going to do. And some of that's in Job too. That's it for our allotted time this morning, so we'll pause there. We're going to be picking up in chapter 37 in our reading as we listen to the work of God as He